Hello everyone and welcome to a fresh Blender tutorial. I'm Blaze and today I'm going to show you how to model and texture an awesome glowing 3D crystal inside the Cycles engine in Blender 3.6. I did my best to make this video completely beginner friendly, so I'll be walking you through every single step of the process. If you need to pause or slow the video down, don't be afraid to do so. I did my best to pack all the information into one video so you won't have to go all over the place to understand any of my steps. Thank you for watching. Let's get right into it. We're going to open up Blender and we're going to start a new general file. Go ahead and select and delete the default cube and hit Shift and A to add an icosphere. Up in the top right, we're going to immediately rename our icosphere to Exterior just to keep ourselves organized right off the bat. This orange square is our object properties. We're going to make sure this is selected. We're going to change this scale Z to 2. This changes our sphere to this oblong gem, which is pretty nice. It's very decadent and very symmetrical, but to me it looks more like some of that plastic jewelry you might find for arts and crafts. I prefer something more natural, so what I'm going to do is click on the blue wrench and add a decimate modifier. If you play with this slider, you'll see that a ratio of 0 is just a basic triangle, which is not even close to what we want, and a ratio of 1 is our original shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here and change my value to 0.6 and hit enter. This is a much more random and natural feeling shape, and if you follow the values that I give you, you will have exactly the same object parameters that I do in this tutorial. Now we're going to make sure our object is selected in the window, and without moving your mouse, hit Shift D and left click one time. This duplicates your object in the exact same coordinates as your original. And if you're not sure whether or not one is there, up here in the top right, you'll see your original exterior and now a duplicate just beneath it. We could rename our duplicate to interior and hit enter. We're now going to work on our interior, so we can hide our exterior with this little eyeball. It's still here, it's just temporarily hidden from our view. Select the interior, and we're immediately going to go to the object properties, scale the X to 0.8, the Y to 0.8, and the Z to 1.6. This makes the interior 20% smaller than the exterior and gets us ready for our next modifier, which is going to be a bevel. Feel free to play with this. I'm going to set my amount to 0.24 and my segments to 15. That's going to leave us with this very awkward looking shape, but don't worry, it's not going to be on the outside. Of course, it is the interior. It's the core of our gem. If we unhide the exterior and still have this one selected, you can see that it is indeed about 20% smaller, and fortunately, because they started on the same coordinates, they have the same origin, and when you scale it, it's exactly in the center of our original shape. And that is it for all the modeling. Alright, so let's go ahead and move on to the materials portion. First thing we're going to do is get ourselves set up for success by hitting Z and moving your mouse up. And now we're going to be in our rendered view. This is exactly how our renders are going to be showing up. And go ahead over here to the render option and make sure Cycles is selected. Now, while we are facing the positive X direction, go ahead and hit Shift A to add a camera. We look from the side, we can hit G and X to slide this around and reposition our camera, and whichever camera you want to see from in your render, make sure this little camera icon is selected. Clicking the camera here will let you see from the camera's point of view. Whatever the active camera is going to be how your render comes out as a single image. Okay, so we're going to start with the exterior actually. Go ahead and make sure the exterior is selected and that you can see it over here with the eyeball on the right. Drag this menu up, and in the top left, make sure you select Shader Editor. This is going to start out blank, but as we hit New, we're going to be greeted with some of these nodes. These are how we control the materials inside of Blender, and it can start to get a little overwhelming, but trust me, I'm going to walk you through every step of this process. Start by turning the transmission all the way up, and that should be it now for the exterior, at least for now. we can tweak stuff later. Select the interior and start a new material. Change the emission strength to 0.3 and change the metallic value all the way to 1. We're now going to add some more nodes so that we can get some color going on in here. Shift A to add a color ramp. Also add a gradient texture, a mapping node, and finally a texture coordinate. With all these nodes, we can tweak different settings and essentially get some different outputs with all of the different properties of our material. Going from left to right, we're going to start with this object and plug it into the vector. We're going to go vector to vector, color to vector, and color to base color, as well as the same color down to emission. As soon as we plug in this emission node, you're going to see a noticeable change with our material. Leave that connected. And coming over here to the mapping node, now we're going to start changing the settings. Change the Y scaling to 1.3, and now we're going to focus on our color ramp. If you change this, you can kind of see that it's going to change our gradient quite a bit with these sliders. So select the black tab, and we are going to select our outside color. I'm going to go with probably a 0.675, just so it's easier for you guys to follow along, but don't be afraid to mess around with this part. This is very much up to personal preference. I'm going to pick kind of like a pastel peach color, and now we're actually going to move these sliders. This one we're only going to move a little bit, say 0.05, and now the one on the right we're going to set to 0.65. All right, that should be it for the initial coloring on here. And if you change the emission value, you can kind of see that's going to affect how much our object is glowing. For now, leave it at 0.3, but feel free to change it later on once we get everything else laid out. All right, to take a quick pause and to see our progress, up here in the layout window, we can hit Shift A and add a plane. Hit R, Y, 90. That's gonna make it facing us. We can scale it up so that it's kind of like a backdrop for our object. Right now, if you like, go ahead and hit F12 to render, and you will start to get a preview of what your gem looks like. If you like this exactly how it is, then you're good to go. But I'm going to go a few steps further, and I'm going to try to make the exterior of our crystal a little more realistic. Also, a quick tip about rendering with Cycles. Cycles is much more computer intensive than Eevee. Eevee, for example, if you hit F12, it'll render it very quickly. My computer does it in milliseconds actually, so which is great. But the way that the materials, light and transmissive materials work is completely different between the two rendering engines. So we're going to stick with Cycles, and down here in the sampling tab, I'm actually going to turn mine down to something like 512 for the maximum samples. That's going to take the rendering time down. It will not be as refined and as realistic or perfect as, you know, with way more samples, but it's going to be a lot quicker to essentially render this out and get an idea of your progress. Fortunately for me, I'm running like a 3070, and this can be done in maybe like 5 minutes, but if you do have a weaker PC, it's gonna take longer. That's just how it works. So like I said, I'm gonna go back to the exterior material, and I'm gonna make a new duplicate material so that way I can have my old one, which was actually material 4, and we can change the name of that to exterior just so that we are organized. Now our new one, which is a duplicate, we can change this to exterior fancy. Really doesn't matter what it's named, it's just for our own reference. Now the exterior is going to be a little more involved than the interior nodes were, and what we're going to do is start with a color ramp and a bump node. All right, we're going to hit Shift D and duplicate the bump, and we are also going to duplicate the color ramp. If you lay them out like this, it'll look exactly like mine. Now we're going to add a noise texture. Go ahead and duplicate this and place it right below. We're also going to add what's called a Voronoi texture. Finally, the last node we're going to be adding is the texture coordinate, just like before. All right, so moving left to right, vaguely, we're going to start with the texture coordinate and connect the object to the vector of all 3 of these orange gold looking nodes here. Connect this color to the height here, and following this bump down to the normal of the other bump. This second bump is going to be connected to the normal of our principled BSDF, and immediately you can see a change. This is adding some texture to our gem immediately. What bump is essentially a 3D texture. It's kind of reading the information that goes into it and affecting the topology of the surface as it's rendered in cycles. Going way back over here to the second noise texture, we're going to connect the factor to this color ramp, and we're also going to connect this factor to this color ramp. Following the top color ramp, we can connect the color to the roughness. The second color ramp, we can connect the color to the height of this bump. Coming down to the Voronoi texture now, we're going to immediately just connect the distance over here to the clear coat normal. Here you go. If you want to screenshot this or pause on this, this is how all of our nodes are going to be connected. All right, so it's time to start changing some of the values. For the first noise texture, change the scale to 1.7, the detail to 15, and the roughness and distortion can stay the same. The second noise texture is going to be similar, but not quite the same. It's going to be 2.9 for the scale, 15 again for the detail. The roughness is going to be 0.3, and the distortion is 1.9. So not actually similar, completely different. I misspoke. Down here with the Voronoi texture, we can change the random to about 0.6 and the scale to something like 4.2. All right, let's handle the bump nodes now. The first one, change the strength to 0.1, keep the distance the same. The second bump node, the strength is going to be 0.06. That's 0.06. It's quite small. The distance, I changed mine to 3.6 and hit enter. And you can immediately see that changed it quite a bit from the original 1 to 3.6. Now is where we're going to get some more interesting stuff going on. So with the lower color ramp, we're going to keep all of the original black and whites, but we're going to change the value on the sliders. So somewhere around maybe 40%, and then move the white one about that far from it. And this one up here, take that there, and this one about here. So if you want to take a screenshot of our nodes here, feel free, or take time to pause on it, whatever you like. So right now we currently have our fancy exterior crystal, as well as our really cool gradient core. If we hit F12, we can start rendering this out, and if you like what you see, then you're good to go. I'm gonna add a few more things to our scene just to make it really pop. So our scene is pretty nice. We get to see all of our hard work displayed here. Just to get a better render though, I am going to make sure this plane is moved back. You can do so by selecting the plane and hitting G and X to move it back along the x-axis, and we can just put it slightly behind our crystal. Go ahead and delete the original lighting source and hit Shift A to add an area light. We can hit G and Z to move it up along the z-axis and scale it up like that, so that it is at least covering the reference box for your camera. I'm going to change the color to some kind of purple. There we go. Real quick, I'm going to select the background plane and give it a new material. I'm just going to make the base color close to a black or maybe a gray, and we are going to duplicate our lighting source, rotate it by hitting R, and 180. All right, the bottom one I am going to change to our other color here, something like an orange, and we can give it a lower value. Go ahead and do a test render and see what you've got. So as you can see, we have some really cool colors going on with our crystal, but we can't quite see the edges and exactly how exterior light is really going to be playing with our object. So the way that we're going to address that is we are going to add what's called an HDRI. This is essentially a file that has a 360 view of a location, and it kind of has some lighting mapped into it as well. What this does is it gives an image for the light to essentially bounce off, so any metallic or transmissive materials can really have an environment to interact with. So down here in the shader editor, instead of having object selected like before, now we're going to click on world, click on the background, delete that, Shift A, and we're going to go with environment texture. Connect the color, the surface, and we are going to open our HDRI image file. Immediately, well, It might take a little bit depending on the speed of your computer, but we are going to end up with this 360 omnidirectional picture view. And as you can see, the sun is where the lighting is coming from, so it's really cool. If you don't like where the sun is coming from, we can change that by adding a mapping node and I believe a texture coordinate. If it doesn't disappear, then you've done this correctly. For this one, I played around with it a little bit, and I believe if we set this -135 is a nice rounded number, and I'm gonna stick with that. I'm gonna hit F12 to render. Just real quick, I'm gonna check this, and I'm gonna actually turn this down a little bit more. And our area lights, I think we can actually turn up the brightness. 800 might even be appropriate because of the fact that we have the HDRI. All right, I'm gonna render this out. All right, so this gave us a render that I am pretty happy with. I like how the light is playing off of this side and kind of transmitting through this way. If you would like to save these materials for future projects, there is a way to do that, and I'm going to show you right now. Go up to Edit and Preferences, and we're going to look for the material library. For whatever reason, this is not automatically selected, so just make sure the check mark is there. So long as you check this once and do not reinstall Blender, it should automatically be good to go for the rest of your sessions. Go ahead and close this, and now we're going to go to each of our materials, go to the material section down here, and open up the tab that says Material Library. First, we can start by adding a new library. We can name this Crystal, hitting OK. And this material library is a little bit slow, so do be patient with it. We are going to click Add to Library, and as you can see, it added our exterior fancy to the material library. Click on our interior node, add it to the library, and we can actually rename this, re-add it to the library, and we should be good to go. I'm going to quickly show you how simple it is to change the colors of our crystal by duplicating the color ramp. And now this little color profile is just saved inside of our material, so we can mess around with this one. I'm going to make this some kind of green on the outside. I might change to a lighter blue. And already this is going to look pretty cool. I didn't change the exterior lighting sources, so we do kind of have the whole color spectrum going on here, but I think it's really awesome. And it just goes to show how much control you have over your materials in Blender. So that is our finished render. That's going to do it for today. This is my first tutorial in Blender, so I would really appreciate any feedback that you have. And I hope that I was able to help and bring the ideas that you have in your mind to life. Thank you all for watching.